I picked a few photographs out for us to look at.
Oh, good. Okay.
Because everybody enjoys laughing about the tweaker shelter that landed on the moon. And of course, this particular tweaker shelter, when they start to design something, it's always been curious to me is why it has all of these unusual shapes, because it takes an awful lot more technical ability to now you've got to seal this thing to be in a vacuum, right? And you're not maximizing the space that you have to fit in the rocket. It's a round tube that you're trying to put this thing into. That's so to maximize the space of this, wouldn't you want it to match the container it's going to go into?
No, that's logical. NASA are not logical.
But just before we go to the other part into the tweaker shelter itself, I found this photograph and I was looking at it, and of course the highly unusual little tiny blue marble sitting there instead of a big ball. And I was looking at the lighting. And then I pulled the next two photos later up, and what is it doing over here?
Well, that's where they put the spotlight, isn't it?
The light is coming straight down. It's almost vertical on them. Here, you can see the shadow line here coming down.
Yep.
So if you follow that shadow line from there to there up, the sun has got to be up there. And yet, this is showing up in the shadow. If you look right there, it's showing up in the shadow right there. So it's over. It's coming in far enough from where he's standing to come in and across that. It's just one of the most unusual things. And of course, you can see that it is a light.
You've got the stand for the light there, or something there. It shouldn't be there because the sun is so bright it wouldn't necessarily allow that sort of shadow to be on the picture.
Yeah, but it's got to be up this way.
Well, of course it has. Yeah.
And now it's over here. An additional sun is over there. What I'd like to do is cover some of the things that we've gone over before, because we've covered the lighting shooting up into here where it can't possibly be. You're even getting reflections here and reflections there. Those are direct light reflections coming off. And then you have an additional lighting over here causing even brighter reflections.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And reflections under here, up on the bottom side of the leg, but going all the way in the door. Even if they claimed it was coming off the ground, it's going right into the door. The ground's down here, it's coming up. How does it get lit there? How does that get lit there?
Exactly.
This comes out about 4 feet. On there blocking that, and just want people to know how that lighting works. And of course, that band of lighting there. Yeah. And then of course, we have to mention the fact that its PLSS is actually right up against the door frame. Yeah. And there's 15 inches of console sticking out inside of there that can't possibly be. We have the panoramic as well.
That's actually a composite, that picture.
Yes. This is the panoramic composite. I think it was 3 photographs. Yeah. And they've touched it up even farther. Look at the lighting up into there.
Oh, God, yeah.
It's just unbelievable. Of course, they've put this in here for the reflective surface of the moon. Yeah.
But that position of the sun is completely wrong.
The diffusion of light sets it straight off. I mean, I don't know how when they put this together, but they've managed to blur that all the way in there. Of course, you can see the hot spots coming in here, and it fades way off over here. Sunlight just doesn't do that. I mean, there's so many things they missed in it, and so many things they enhanced. Look at the lighting here. Look at down in here. Like, that's coming from a direct light to be able to strike that like that. And right there. Look at that coming in.
It might be worth also mentioning that top rung where you've got the big obstruction in the middle of the rung.
Yeah, right there and there. It's the third rung down is the first one that goes over top.
Yeah, it does. But it's worth pointing out that that would require very careful placement of the feet.
Oh, you can't see anything when you're coming off of that and down.
No, I know you can't.
Even if you didn't have a helmet on, you wouldn't be able to look around and down. That's lit right there.
Yeah, it is. Seems like there's a shadow across here, which is a bit weird. See where it goes across there?
Yeah.
it looks like there's a shadow.
Yeah, well, they've enhanced all of the lighting effects. They've brought them through forward on both of those photographs.
As we look at it, to the right-hand side of that panel, where's that coming from? How's that being cast?
I think that's an additional panel, actually.
Is it?
Yeah, that's an additional panel. That's a flat line back, and this one drops down black, and that one continues on.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Of course, this is completely blacked out because they weren't paying attention. Everything else is lit up on the backside, and this didn't get lit at all.
There seems to be a sort of highlight of light towards the bottom.
Right there, that.
There. Now, if they're using spotlights or any form of artificial light, because that surface is curved, that's the exhaust deflector of the attitude control rockets, because that's curved, it would enhance any light, it would show it up. So it seems that there is some form of additional lighting.
Yeah, well, you see, he's doing it on the back side of this one.
Yes, you can. You can almost see the shadows there.
Yeah, it almost looks like it's a piece of metal. Here's a beautiful scene, this one in the composite, where there's absolutely no blast crater whatsoever.
No, none at all. And no dust in the footpads either.
No, and the garbage bag is already out the door before Neil gets out.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the impact of this entire machine landing.
Yep.
You have one-time compression legs starting just below the secondary strut down, and just the normal weight of this craft, these legs would compress by 10 inches, and that would wrinkle the mylar on the outside of it. That's before you have an impact. So
Yep.
whichever leg hit first is going to have the greatest impact, and yet they're all sitting fully erect, fully extended out. They haven't had any compression of any kind on them. And there's a nice close-up of it. Just beautiful, right? They should wrinkle up at least 10 inches down on this thing. That's just standing there. Whichever ones hit first are going to be farther down. They're designed to compress 32 inches in total.
There's no indication of any form of wrinkling.
Nothing.
Yeah,
Actually, I think the legs are just locked out so they don't compress.
could be, could be.
Because I saw other ones, they didn't even have the slides on them. There's Apollo 12,
Same thing there.
and you're starting to get all of the same lighting, incredible lighting. The fall off of lighting in Apollo 12 is just crazy. The hot spot is right there.
Yeah, no blast crater.
No blast crater, no compression of the legs,
No.
no dirt in the pads. And then you start to see that they were having a bit of a rain event, and you can see that it's wet. You can see it there where it's drying off everywhere on this piece of machinery as well. What is interesting is that he actually unloads this thing. This is the RTG, and that is a highly radioactive piece of equipment that gets inserted down into here. When he opens that up, you think the radiation coming off of that core that he pulls out of there would affect his radio, his communications? You think it would just create static like anything, right?
Well, you think it would affect the photographic film as well.
You think it should completely damage it, should completely wipe out the film camera that he's got on his chest.
Yeah.
Those are just a few things that they did wrong while they were making this little movie presentation for the world to look at.
Yeah. What's the piece of equipment the RTG was being put into?
That little core that was stored on the outside up there, radioactive core.
Okay, but what is the box supposed to do? What experiments were they going to conduct with that?
That was supposed to generate electricity to keep the battery charged up on the experimental equipment. And here's the pack with the experimental equipment. All of it stored in this nice little thing with those Boyd bolts. Those little red dots you see there are Boyd bolts. And you just push the tool and give it a turn, and then they pop out to release them. This machine was supposed to power all of to create the energy.
Yeah, okay.
It's like a heat sink with two different kinds of metal in it. As the heat energy is coming out of the radioactive core, okay, creates electricity across the two different heat paths.
So after they put the RTG into the heater, did they then move it away from the lander?
Well, it goes out with the experimental equipment, but while they're working around it, this thing is going to be giving off radiation regardless.
Yeah, of course it is.
This was the protective case up here that it was in, and as soon as you pop the lid off the thing, you're going to be in trouble. He has in his hand right there, that tool right there, that's the lid off of the core. That's just another anomaly, having this little radiation problem along with what we see in every photograph is the same thing.
Yeah. But of course, don't forget that the suits gave them 100% protection against radiation.
Except when you x-ray them.
Well, exactly, yes. But it always surprises me that the manufacturers of the spacesuit didn't know anything about radiation, because they didn't build any in. No protection was built into the spacesuits.
Well, given that they were a bra manufacturer.
Yes. International Latex Corporation.
And this particular photograph, this is a bad one of Apollo 14. There again, the anomaly here is this is supposed to be the Earth. Look at the direction of the lighting where the sun is striking the so-called Earth. It is actually below the horizon. This would not light up whatsoever. And even if it was just coming over the horizon a little bit, so-called, to close this is facing the other way. It should be pure black. All of this down here has to be black. You wouldn't even see it because you don't have an atmosphere. There's no refraction of light anywhere. It's either light or it's dark. Even Neil Armstrong, when he got down off the ladder and he was standing in the shade and he's looking down and he said, "I can't even see my boots."
He was probably meant to say that to show that he was on the lunar surface.
Right. Just because he's in the shadow, he was making the statement because light is light and dark is dark and nothing refracts. There's no atmosphere to diffuse the light, so it's either on or off, the same as the temperature is either on or off. If the sunlight's striking it, it's going to be very hot, and if it's not, it's going to get very cold. This is the other shot of Apollo 14. Well, what we've got here is we've got a nicely lit, they actually lit the ground up. It doesn't have any, there's a little bit of fall off over here, but they've cleaned up the fall off from the other photographs. But Apollo 14 is missing the bottom section of the mylar that they were wrapping it around.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, they are. Yeah, it is.
And when I was reading through the PDF files, they decided to add it on Apollo 11, and it was actually added after it was loaded into the rocket ready for launch. Each one of these mylar sections, this piece that goes on there, coming up that 32 inches,
yep,
is 10 pounds per leg.
10 pounds of mylar per leg. That's quite heavy, isn't it?
Yeah. Like I found that out by reading the pieces that they added to Apollo 11 before it took off. Well, if you don't need 40 pounds, and it's 1,000 pounds of fuel per pound, that's 20 tons of fuel that you don't need.
Exactly. That's a good point. Very good point.
Just for this. And then why is it back on? The legs didn't get damaged. The mylar's there to protect the legs. Why don't you take it off all the legs? They're just aluminum.
There's no need to have it on in the first place.
Right. If it didn't need to be there,
no,
then take the rest of it off. There's at least another 20, 25 pounds per leg here, plus the secondary struts that it doesn't need to be on. You could get rid of another 150, 200 pounds of mylar off of this machine because you don't have to wrap the feet or anything else.
It just shows up better in photographs, doesn't it?
But they should have learned this.
Yeah.
Aren't these guys scientists, PhDs, and all of that stuff? And then the payload specialists that are trying to drop the weight down all the time. Look at all those guys. And they couldn't see this and say, hey, we don't need it? If this happened in Apollo 14, for whatever reason they didn't put it on, and they go, hey, look at this. Everything worked really well. Well, let's drop all of this. You get rid of a couple 100 pounds. You're talking over 100 tons of fuel, minimum, that you could get rid of.
Yeah, because that's got to go all the way to the moon. So it's not just going to Earth orbit. So they've got to have the extra fuel.
Well, 1,000 pounds of fuel per payload, for 1
Yep.
pound of payload.
Yep, that's right.
So you get rid of 40 pounds there. You could easily get rid of another 200 pounds.
Not very clever, these people, are they?
No, but it's in the photographs.
Because the photographs look so much better with Mylar all over the place.
There's enough mylar that they could have stripped off of here that they then, in Apollo 15, could have added the rover and say they didn't gain any weight.
That rover weighed 450 pounds here on Earth.
I've never seen if that included the batteries or not, because the batteries are 65 kilos apiece.
Wow, okay. The 65 kilos is what, 140 pounds?
So that's 260 pounds on top of the 450 of the rest of the rover, I would guess.
You'd think they'd have got slightly better quality batteries than they use. They were truck batteries.
They were zinc acid, not lead acid batteries.
All right, okay.
So they hold a denser charge, but they're non-rechargeable. And anytime you see a zinc acid battery listed in the Apollo, which all of them were except for the ones for the experimental station, because you have a charger that's charging it back up. So it has to be a lead acid battery to do that.
That's true.
Zinc acid batteries don't charge up. But when I read all the documentation on everything else in the CSM and they're using zinc acid batteries in there, you can't charge them up. And then you read an updated PDF file that says, oh, they charge them up every 10 or 12 hours on their way there. Well, with what? All of a sudden they come up with a nuclear generator on top of the thing to charge it up with?
No, because they knew they had to show that the batteries were recharged, otherwise they wouldn't have lasted long enough.
Right, they had to do that. So they now installed something to charge it up on the thing, and they weren't carrying that kind of nuclear devices on their thing in case it blew up on takeoff, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So one anomaly, they try to cover up one fact that the batteries wouldn't last that long. And then if you have a nuclear generator on board, then the batteries are just backup.
Yeah.
Your entire machine is going to be running on that thing all the time. You don't turn them off and then back on again, those things. You turn them on and they stay on. Just like when you put that charge core into the RTG, it runs and that's it. You don't need to go near it, or you don't want to go near it. There's more and more anomalies in every one of these things, but this is unique because the weight factor was so important. I mean, when they say they counted every stitch in a spacesuit, right? And here's 40 pounds. Don't need it. And realizing that the rest of the legs don't need it. So you've got a few 100 pounds that you can strip off of this thing right away.
Yeah, I can.
And that would be a huge find or discovery to be able to do that. And they did not do it. And my theory is it's the same vehicle being used over and over again. And Apollo 12, they're all getting moldy. They're covered in water at the bottom of them, and so they just strip them off. And you can see it in Apollo 12. They're so dark and got so much mold inside them that they don't even reflect light.
On that previous picture, Scott,
Yeah?
that square box on the right in the picture, what was that?
A picnic table when they stopped for lunch.
Oh, of course it was. Yes. Picnic.
That one down there?
Yep.
Part of the experimental equipment.
If it is, where did they take it out from? Where's the storage? Logically, it would be just above it.
This is open a little slot here.
All right, okay, yeah, that's where they put it. That quadrant was where they put the lunar rover on the next missions.
The funny thing is you can't put anything really in there because inside that is first one to the right, quadrant 1. That has the large helium tank, and it has a small oxygen tank in there on the thing, and there was only a little slot available beside the helium tank, and it's where they stored extra batteries for the PLSS.
So all that had to be moved to another storage area once the lunar rover was being brought
Well,
in.
you're looking at half the width of that, full depth in there, where they've taken this equipment out of.
Okay, yeah.
But there's supposed to be a helium tank in there. It's in the diagrams. Those helium tanks that helium tank's in the diagram, and that helium tank pressurizes the fuel.
So on the later missions, where was the helium tank shown?
Oh, it just was completely removed. As soon as they put the rover in there, it's just gone.
It's gone.
Yep.
Gone completely.
Anything that was in there was gone.
But helium is necessary to pressurize the oxygen.
Well, that's what they claimed. They needed to keep the pressure up. You can't get a controlled thrust if you don't have a controlled flow of the fuel.
Which is why I think they must have put the helium tank somewhere else.
Oh, I've looked. Not anywhere.
And you can't find it.
No. And speaking of the fact that we're talking, and we've got this picture up here.
Yeah.
This entire machine is better than 26,000 pounds. And when they're descending down, the main part of the weight is on the lower half. They never did this when they were using even the flying bedstead. And they never did it in the simulator. As they're coming down, all of this fuel is being used at the bottom end.
Yeah.
By the time they're a couple of miles off the ground, they might have 10% fuel left or whatever in here. That's 19,000 out of the 26,000 pounds is now gone. Now the thing is top heavy.
That's a very good point.
Now how do you fly the thing? Those thrusters are going to react completely different on your way down. First of all, you've got about 70% of the weight on the lower half of the vehicle. And when you're coming down, by the time you hit the ground, 80% of the weight is above on the top half. That's a huge problem.
Major problem, because it's now top heavy.
And the control thrusters are sitting there up on the top.
Yeah.
They're going to have to fire a whole lot harder because the reaction of that thrust at the bottom is going to be able to kick. It's so light at the bottom and top heavy. And you are in gravity as well, right? When it kicks out, it's really going to kick out.
It is. And those deflector shields from the thrusters on the right don't appear to be in any way, those ones, they don't appear to be in any way damaged, or there's no evidence of the thrusters being fired.
On some of them, it looks like that they got blasted by a little bit of steam. These ones don't, they're just wrinkled. Some of them have scorch marks on them like they were steamed. The actual fact, if this was an actual flying machine.
Yeah, that was supposed to be flying and in action.
Yes, if this was an actual flying machine, you're going to be landing on something that is so far off balance. And it never really struck me, but depends on which document you read. 19,100 pounds of fuel on the lower half. You still have like the so-called the helium bottle and whatever down there. But that is 19,100 pounds out of the 26,000 pounds of the entire craft. You still have full fuel tanks to take off with on the top half.
Yeah, you have, yeah.
That weight is up there. This thing is going to be changing as you are descending. It's going to react differently every time you hit the thrusters. And by the time you get to the ground, it's going to be so freaking sensitive.
It's going to be bouncing around all over the place.
You imagine getting even a little bit of reflective wave coming off the surface when you're landing. It's going to kick it out. Those little thrusters wouldn't be able to control that.
No, they wouldn't. Which is why helicopters have their blades on top of the machine.
This machine takes 6 times the attitude compared to a helicopter. Like if you wanted to start a forward movement and you just tilt a helicopter forward and you go 5 degrees and it gently flies off, you have to go 30 degrees on this to do the same thing. And now you're kicked way over and the weight's all wrong. It's just going to flip.
And we're told that the landing engine, the descent engine, is gimbaled, but only about 6 degrees, which indicates it can't really gimbal very far out. So if the craft goes out of balance, there's only a limit to what it can be returned.
This thing would flip so quickly, the gimbal would never catch it. It'd never flip back the other direction to catch it. It'd be way too quick. Even when you're 50-50, it's going to be a fairly hairy thing to do. And when you see the flying bedstead, everything was balanced on that thing for weight.
Yeah, it had to be.
It was a very wide thing. It wasn't a tall profile. They never actually flew anything that's in this configuration with the offset weight that this thing's got. Can you imagine flying an aircraft and having it go from 80% at the rear, and all of a sudden the weight goes to 80% at the front. It just switches over within a few minutes.
Wouldn't stay in the air for very long, would it? Go straight down again.
You have to balance these things. This thing, just in its design, like I say, you've got rocket scientists here, guys with PhDs. Wonder today they can't design a lander. No wonder they don't have one yet. If somebody looked at this thing and realized the offset weight when you start using fuel and try to land it, no wonder they can't design one.
Some of the guys at SpaceX and Blue Origin probably have looked at this to say, well, how did Apollo do it? And they've looked at this and they've thought to themselves, probably not that way in the future. And being good Americans, they're probably not prepared to come out and say the Apollo lander couldn't possibly have worked for these reasons. It's interesting, the Starship lander has rockets at the top of the craft to control it rather than at the bottom.
Yeah, and their legs have better articulation on them.
Yeah.
I mean, even in the movies, Star Trek movies and stuff like that, the legs land like the rear leg of like a grasshopper or something like that, right? Where they can set the vehicle down and up again. These are just, they come out, they're hard, and they've got one-time compression to absorb the shock, right? The crushable aluminum core in there that gets crushed down and it doesn't come back.
Yeah.
That in itself is absolutely stupid. You're not landing on a level surface.
It's interesting, there is no picture that I'm aware of, I don't know if you've seen one, which shows the legs compressed in any way at all on any of the 6 missions.
None of them.
So all this talk about compression and honeycombed shock absorbers is just so much flannel. It didn't exist. It doesn't need to exist because none of the craft, even though they didn't land necessarily on flat surfaces, none of the craft show any compression of any legs, which is a bit odd when you think about it, because not all the landers were shown on flat surfaces.
I'll pull up the Apollo 15. You can see how deep that is in there.
Yeah, got it.
This is the leg that they had to replace. This is the one that got broken off. Here it is on the front side. This leg is longer to the secondary strut from here to here than this one is.
So you'd expect that left-hand side to be compressed, but it's not.
Well, this one got broken off, but they actually had to make it longer than an original leg. 32 inches down, and there's no compression on the foil.
No.
And if you look, this one is about another foot longer.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And this is the one that's broken off, and you can see that even the foil is different color here than this one because they had to replace this leg. And if you look at the video, of course, this actually gets kicked up and broken off, and the secondary strut ends up laying on the ground in that landing sequence. The other thing that you'll see in there, there's a strap that comes across, and I guess it's to help stabilize it when they're lowering it down on the crane. They put an additional strap on it, I guess, so it doesn't swing around this way, you know, sideways and all kinds of stuff when they're lowering it down. They're keeping it in place, and you can see that flutter as well. I mean, all of that's identified. People looking at this bloody tweaker shelter. In South America, they call it a shanty shack. And there are other countries that would call it a 2-story luxury condo because it actually has a canvas garbage bag. So that would make it the luxury unit, would it not? Other places just throw their garbage out without a garbage bag.
It's got 2 floors as well, so it's
luxury condo.
Oh, very, very good. And a ladder up to it's all...
Yeah. And a ladder, not just rope swing up. And of course, Apollo 15. They went out on a rover on 2 missions before they came back and shot anything around that machine whatsoever.
And of course, putting a rover in it would unbalance it quite significantly.
And of course, when they got back, after going out, and there's only 2 guys, they came back. And of course, this was what happened. You know, the moon guys showed up there, and they damaged all of this equipment because they were away on that rover.
Yeah.
And these are the photographs they took when they got back. All of their stuff is gone through. There's the actual, just where it hit the ground. I mean, you imagine the exhaust just hitting the ground like that. This is the articulating arm that brings the rover down onto the ground. And you can see this one's broken right off of here.
Yeah.
This one's broken, like this loops around and is broken. And here's the two articulating arms that swing out and down to help the rover down onto the ground. They're broken right off. These little straps that were sitting there, I would think they would be to actually open the door and stuff like that, because they've got a little pull tab on them and stuff. But this is the actual arm that come down on shocks. You can see the two shocks here that open up and help guide it down. The cable running through there go through on these little pulley arms. And the one on this side is nowhere to be seen, right?
No, it's gone.
Completely gone. That's what happened when it hit the ground. It hit so hard it actually knocked the rover right off the machine. And they had to fix that up quickly and go for a ride so they could come back and work on this. And of course, they missed out on one of the most essential things that you could ever do to the American public. They did not have these guys come down the ladder, put the flag up, and salute it. They jumped on the rover, and for 2 missions, they were gone. That is probably the biggest anomaly that they had.
There's certainly something very strange about that, because in the picture on the rocket skirt underneath, you can see it creased on both sides. It's been compressed. NASA aren't talking about that, are they? They're not saying, well, we had a bit of a hard landing there, guys. Sorry, we shook a few things loose, and it all fell apart. But no, they get in the rover and off they go, having forgotten to put the flag up.
The thing is that wrinkle is still in the exhaust on Apollo 17.
Yeah.
Which means it's the same vehicle.
Same vehicle.